Sabrina Holt, 31 years old. 2 weeks ago, my mother called to tell me not to come to my brother's restaurant grand opening. She said the guest list was curated, investors, food critics, influencers, and that my presence would, in her words, throw off the energy of the room. She actually said that. Throw off the energy. Like I was some bad frequency she could just tune out, so I stayed home. I ordered Thai takeout and ate it standing over my kitchen sink in my apartment in Austin, watching Instagram stories of people I'd never met, clinking glasses inside a dining room my family had built partly on my work. My phone rang at 9:47 that night. It was my sister-in-law, and her voice was shaking so hard I almost didn't recognize it. "Sabrina, what is that article? What did you do?" The whole comment section is, "Mom is on the phone with the lawyer. You need to fix this right now." I didn't fix anything. I didn't say a word. I just sat down on my kitchen floor and let it happen. But I should back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning, and the beginning goes further back than most people would think. My family owns Kettle and Stone, a regional barbecue chain started by my grandfather in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1987. 3 locations when he died, 7 by the time my dad took over, 12 when my brother stepped in as the face of the brand. The name is everywhere in East Tennessee. There's a granite plaque in the original location with my grandfather's photo on it. My dad has it in his email signature. My brother used to joke that it was the family coat of arms. Growing up, I understood exactly what I was in that picture. Not an heir. Not a future partner. I was the one who asked too many questions at dinner, who wanted to talk about margin calculations when everyone else wanted to talk about a new smoker they were sourcing from a guy in Memphis. My dad would listen patiently for about 30 seconds and then change the subject. My mom would smile and say, "You're so analytical, sweetheart." The way someone says you're so tall to a teenager who just hit their head on a doorframe. My brother has our grandfather's laugh and our dad's handshake. He walked into rooms like he already owned them, and people handed him things. Contracts, compliments, cold beers. He's genuinely good with people in a way I have never been and never will be. I know that. I don't resent it. What I resented was the assumption that because he had the charm and I had the spreadsheets, his work was real and mine was decorative. I left for UT Austin for undergrad and stayed for a master's in food science. My thesis was on fermentation chemistry, specifically on how microbial cultures could be used to develop proprietary flavor profiles that were both consistent at scale and legally protectable through trade secret documentation. It sounds dry when I describe it that way, but what it actually meant was that I had figured out a way to make a sauce taste exactly the same whether you made 100 gallons or 10,000, and to do it in a way that was genuinely difficult to reverse engineer. I called it the Grain Protocol, just a working name I used in my notes, but it stuck. My advisor told me it had commercial potential. I filed a provisional patent in my own name on a Tuesday afternoon with money I'd saved from my campus job. I did it quietly, no announcements. I had been careful for years by then, without fully understanding why I was being careful. Some part of me already knew. The call came in the spring of my last semester. My dad's voice, but the tone my mom uses when she's prepping for a negotiation. "Sabrina, we need to sit down when you're home. The brand needs a refresh. Your brother has some ideas about expanding to Nashville, but we need something to anchor the new locations. Something that says we've evolved." I drove back to Knoxville in May with my diploma still unframed in my back seat. The meeting was in the original location after close. Dad at the head of the table, Mom next to him, my brother across from me with a legal pad and a new pair of glasses he clearly thought made him look more serious. They laid it out like a business proposal. The chain was healthy but stagnating. Their regular customers were loyal, but younger diners weren't coming in. The Nashville expansion needed something new to talk about. A signature sauce line, something proprietary, something they could put on shelves and license. "You've been working on exactly this kind of thing?" my mom said, folding her hands. "It would be perfect." I asked what the arrangement would look like. My dad said we'd figure it out, that it was family, that these things didn't need to be complicated. My brother nodded. "We just need to know how it works first. Walk us through it." I told myself it was a consultation. I kept it surface level. I explained the fermentation process in general terms. I talked about how the flavor layering worked conceptually. I showed them sample outputs from controlled tests, nothing proprietary, nothing that would let anyone replicate what I'd built. I watched my brother take notes, and I kept my voice calm and my laptop closed. 2 weeks later, he texted me. "This is exactly what we need. Come to the pitch Thursday. Just be there in case the investors ask technical questions." I went. It was a private dining room at a hotel in downtown Knoxville. 8 people in blazers and one woman I recognized from a food industry publication. My brother stood at the front and talked for 40 minutes. He talked about heritage. He talked about the emotional authenticity of the brand. He talked about a proprietary fermentation-based flavor development process that would anchor the new menu across all Nashville locations and eventually be packaged for retail. His slides had my terminology on them, not paraphrased, not adjacent, the exact phrases I had used in my notes and in the consultation. Controlled microbial seeding, layered thermal reduction sequencing. I sat in the back and felt something cold settle in my stomach. One of the investors leaned forward and asked who had developed the process. My brother smiled. "We have a food scientist in the family. She's been contributing to our R&D. Contributing." I almost laughed. Afterward, he handed me a document in the parking lot. "Standard NDA for family contributors," he said. "Covers everything related to Kettle and Stone's brand development. Just a formality. You know how investors are." I flipped through it quickly. It was not standard, it was broad. It covered all proprietary food science consultation provided in connection with the brand, including future development. I asked if it protected my prior work. He said, of course, we were family. I signed because I still believed that word meant something shared instead of something owned. I drove back to Austin that weekend. I started pulling up my provisional patent timeline and comparing it against the dates of our consultation. Everything I had shared with them post-dated my filing by months. But the NDA used language that could, in the wrong courtroom, cloud that. I called a food IP attorney I found through a professor connection. She read the NDA the same afternoon I sent it. "This is aggressive," she said. "Whoever drafted this wanted to capture as much as possible. But your patent filing date is clean. If you documented the consultations separately, you should be protected." Did you document it? I had. I'd kept notes with timestamps. I had draft emails I'd never sent. I had a copy of the original pitch deck my brother had sent me before the investor meeting, with his margin notes visible in the metadata. I had been careful without knowing I was being careful. And now I understood why. I started building quietly while the requests kept coming. Could I run more tests? Could I adjust the formula for high-altitude kitchens? Could I come back in August for a second investor presentation? I gave them less each time. Summaries. General guidance. Nothing that touched the core of what I had built. By September, my brother called on a Sunday morning. "We need the full process," he said. "No hello, no build-up. The Nashville group wants to see it operational by Q1. Investors are expecting it. You gave us enough to know it works, but not enough to run it. We need the documentation." I told him no. My mom called an hour later. Her voice was careful the way a door is careful when it's about to close on something. "Sabrina, I understand you feel protective of your work, but you consulted for us. You used time during family visits. There's an argument that this development happened in the context of the business." There wasn't. But she said it so smoothly that for a second I questioned myself. I said no again. My brother showed up at my apartment in Austin 3 days later. I didn't know he was coming. He rang the bell, and when I opened the door, he walked in and sat down on my couch like he lived there. I stood in the kitchen and pressed record on my phone before I said a single word. "We need the documentation," he said. "The full grain protocol, the culture samples, the thermal logs, everything. You signed the NDA. Everything you developed in connection with Kettle and Stone belongs to the brand." "I developed it independently," I said, "before any consultation. My patent filing predates our first conversation by 4 months. He leaned forward. "That's a legal argument you'd have to make in court. And do you really want to sue your own family? Think about what that does to Dad. He's 63. He built something real. You want to be the person who tears it apart over a sauce recipe. I kept my voice flat. A sauce recipe with a pending patent and documented independent development. We can put your name on it, he said. His tone shifted, softer but not sincere. Attribution in the marketing, an acknowledgement on the packaging. We'll make sure people know you contributed, but we need the files. I didn't say anything. I let him talk. He kept going for another 10 minutes, every sentence landing a little heavier, calling it family work, saying I was being selfish, saying I didn't understand what was at stake, saying our parents were counting on this expansion and that I was making it about myself when it wasn't. When he left, I sat on my floor and listened to the recording twice. After that, things happened fast and quietly at the same time. My brother stopped copying me on family emails. My mom's weekly Sunday calls dropped every other week, then stopped. My dad sent a brief text saying he hoped I would reconsider. No context, no follow-up. A family group chat I'd been in for years went silent. I realized I'd been removed when I tried to send a photo of my niece's birthday gift, and it said the chat didn't exist. In November, my mom called and told me not to come home for Thanksgiving. She said it would be too tense with the business situation unresolved, and that my brother needed to focus on the Nashville opening, which was scheduled for December. She said she was sure I understood. I said I understood. I hung up and sat in my car in a parking lot for about 20 minutes. I had been working with a food industry consultant named Patricia Webb, who operated out of Chicago, and a former classmate who had worked briefly as a Kettle and Stone franchise consultant before leaving the company. He had a copy of the pitch deck from the August investor meeting, the full version, with the slide that showed my technical terminology attributed to internal brand development. He kept it because something had felt off to him at the time. I had also quietly filed an update to my provisional patent, converting it to a full utility filing, with my attorney verifying the independent development timeline on the record. The Nashville opening was December 14th, a Saturday. Black tie soft launch for investors and press, followed by a public opening the next morning. My family had been posting about it for weeks. My mom made a reel about the new interior design. My brother did a walkthrough video showing the kitchen setup. Comments from people who had no idea. I stayed home. I made pasta and watched a movie and tried not to look at my phone. At 8:43 p.m., a food industry newsletter I subscribed to sent a push notification. The headline was, Knoxville Barbecue Chain Faces IP Dispute Over Proprietary Process at Center of Nashville Expansion. My attorney had worked with the journalist for 2 weeks. The story had my patent filing date, the consultation timeline, a verified statement from Patricia Webb on the independent origins of the fermentation process, and the copy of the investor pitch deck with attribution discrepancies clearly noted. It included a short statement I had approved. The grain protocol was developed independently prior to any family consultation and is protected under a utility patent filed in my name. I watched the investor and press event stories continue to roll in on Instagram for about 4 minutes after the notification. My brother raising a glass. My mom in a red dress laughing with someone I didn't recognize. The new logo lit up above the entrance. Then the calls started. My sister-in-law first, her voice barely holding. Then my mom, precise and cold. Then a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be a PR person my brother had apparently hired for the opening. Then my dad. I let everything go to voicemail except my dad. He called twice, and on the second one I picked up. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, is it true? The filing date. Is it actually before you talked to us? 4 months before, I said. He was quiet again. I could hear something in the background, voices, a door closing. I didn't know about the NDA, he said. Your brother handled that. I thought it was administrative. I didn't read it. I know, I said. That doesn't excuse it. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I let him run the expansion his way, and I didn't ask questions I should have asked. That's on me. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I didn't say anything cruel either. I just stayed on the line until he ran out of things to say, and then I told him I needed to go, and I hung up. The story picked up through the weekend. Food industry trades ran follow-ups. A podcast that covered restaurant business disputes reached out to me Monday morning. The Nashville Investor Group issued a brief statement saying they were reviewing the situation before proceeding. 2 of the 3 investors paused their commitments pending resolution. My brother issued a public statement saying Kettle and Stone stood by the originality of its processes and would respond through appropriate legal channels. His attorney sent me a letter referencing the NDA within 48 hours. My attorney responded within 24. Patent supersedes NDA for pre-existing independently developed intellectual property. The filing was clean. The timeline was documented. There was nothing to argue. 6 weeks later, after an IP review conducted by a neutral third party, my brother and the company's board, which included 2 of those original investors, now very much not happy with him, reached a licensing agreement with me. I would not assign ownership. I would license the grain protocol to Kettle and Stone for use in the Nashville expansion and any future locations at a royalty rate my attorney negotiated. My name would appear in all brand materials related to the process. My brother did not call me to tell me this. His attorney emailed mine. My mom sent a text saying she was glad it was resolved and hoped we could move forward as a family. I read it once and put my phone down. I went through my contacts that same evening, blocked my brother, my sister-in-law, an aunt who had sent me a long message calling me vindictive, a cousin who had publicly commented on the news article that I was tearing apart something our grandfather built. I unfollowed my mom's Instagram. I removed myself from the Kettle and Stone family newsletter list I'd somehow still been on. I didn't do any of it in anger. That's the thing people don't understand when you cut family loose cleanly. It doesn't feel like rage. It feels like finally closing a window that's been letting cold air in for years. The royalty check started coming in March. The first one covered 3 months of my rent. The second one was larger. I put most of it back into the lab space I was renting, a shared research kitchen in Austin where I had been developing 2 other formulas with a food startup that had approached me after the news coverage. We signed an actual contract. 50-page document. IP clauses on every page. I read every word. My attorney read it too. I hired a part-time assistant in April, a recent UT grad who found me through LinkedIn and sent a message that said, "I read what happened and I want to work for someone who knows how to protect her work." I hired her on the spot. In June, I spoke at a women in food entrepreneurship panel in Austin. About 40 people in a converted warehouse space, folding chairs, good tacos, real conversations. The moderator introduced me as someone who learned to protect her intellectual property the hard way. I told the room that the hard way was exactly how I'd learned it, and that I didn't regret a single notarized timestamp. The questions afterward were what I remembered most. A woman in her late 20s, flour on her jacket, who had been developing a bread-scoring technique she was afraid to share with the bakery chain her family owned. A food scientist from Dallas who had been doing consulting work for her husband's restaurant group for 3 years without any documented agreement. I talked to both of them for a long time after the panel ended. I sent them both my attorney's contact information. My dad and I have had 2 phone calls since December. They were short. He asked how I was doing. I told him. He told him the Knoxville locations were doing fine, that the Nashville location was finding its footing. He didn't mention my brother. I didn't ask. Both times before we hung up, he said he was sorry. I said I heard him. It's the most honest exchange we've had in years. My brother has not contacted me. I don't expect him to. The last thing I know about him is that the Nashville opening got a mixed review from the publication that covered the launch event, and that the investor group restructured their deal significantly after the IP situation resolved. He's still running the brand. The grain protocol is on the menu and on the packaging. My name is there too in small print, exactly where they tried not to put it. My grandfather started Kettle and Stone with a rented smoker and a borrowed trailer in a church parking lot. He didn't have investors or grand openings or influencer dinners. He had a recipe people wanted and the stubbornness to keep showing up. I used to think I had nothing in common with him. I understand now that I have the only part that mattered. If this story hits something familiar for you, leave a comment below. I read them all. And if you're sitting on work you haven't protected yet, a recipe, a formula, a process, anything you built and someone else wants, please talk to an IP attorney before you say a word to anyone, including family, especially family. I've thought a lot about what my grandfather would have made of all this. A man who rented a smoker and set up in a church parking lot, no investors, no grand opening, no one handing him anything. He made something people wanted and he kept showing up. That was the whole philosophy. I used to think I had nothing of him in me because I worked in a lab instead of at a pit, because I talked about fermentation chemistry at family dinners while everyone else talked about decor. What I understand now is that the stubbornness was his, the staying with it even when nobody was watching. That was his too. I just didn't know I'd inherited it until I needed it. Here's what I believe about how things unfold, and it has nothing to do with luck or fate or any system of reward and punishment handed down from somewhere above. It's simpler than that. What you build in private eventually shows up in public. The timestamps on my files were created at 2 in the morning in a shared apartment while my family was out at barbecue, industry events without me. The patent filing date wasn't strategic. It was just the Tuesday I finally had enough to file. But those quiet, unglamorous choices are what made everything else provable. When my brother sat on my couch and told me to hand over the grain protocol, he had no idea how much documentation was sitting on a drive he'd never seen. That's not clever revenge planning. That's just what happens when you take your own work seriously before anyone else does. The hardest thing wasn't the legal back and forth. It wasn't even being excluded from the opening, though eating pasta alone while my mom posted Instagram stories in a red dress was its own particular kind of awful. The hardest thing was accepting that the people who should have protected me chose not to. My dad said he didn't read the NDA. I believe him. I also believe he didn't ask questions he should have asked because asking would have been uncomfortable, and the family had a pattern of choosing comfortable over honest. That pattern had consequences, not because the universe punished them, but because decisions accumulate. Every choice my brother made to use my work without crediting me, every call my mom made to manage me instead of support me, every time my dad stayed quiet, those added up into a structure that eventually collapsed under its own weight. I didn't bring it down. They built it crooked. What I want anyone to take from this is 3 things I had to learn the expensive, painful way. Take your work seriously enough to document it before you share it with anyone, including people you love. Protect what you build not because you expect betrayal, but because self-respect requires it. And understand that intelligence without integrity is just a faster way to lose. My brother was smart enough to recognize the value of what I'd built, but not honest enough to earn it. And that gap is where everything fell apart for him. I sat at that panel in June and talked to a woman with flour on her jacket who was afraid to protect her own technique because she didn't want to seem like she didn't trust her family. I told her that protecting your work isn't a statement about trust. It's a statement about the value of what you created. Those are different things. Trust is relational. Documentation is professional. You can have both. You should have both. The royalty checks have my name on them now. So does the packaging in small print exactly where they tried not to put it. I didn't need my family to see me clearly. I just needed to see myself that way first.